All right, everybody ready to talk beer for a while? It's almost 11, right? That's perfect timing. Yeah, I mean, hey, if you really want to party, like, we can do it. That's what I do for a living, I guess. Yeah, before you ask, this is actually me. And before you ask, it took 9 22-ounce bottles of beer to get that shot. It took a long time. Friend of mine with a real quick trigger finger on the camera. But yeah, like these guys said, first of all, thank you to John L. Scott for having me. Thank you for letting me be a little late for a doctor's appointment. If you want to know how the doctor's appointment went, it was, hey, doctor, everything hurts. And he's like, you're 45. That's your life. Oh, thanks. Okay. We'll see you later. Here, have some ibuprofen. Like they said, my name's Nick. I'm the director of marketing at our own hometown, Elysian Brewing. Hold for applause. And I'm going to talk to you guys a lot about kind of what we go through on the marketing side in our business. I've been with Elysian for about 5 years now. I love the business. I've been in beer for about 14 years. We'll talk a little bit about that. I show this picture for nothing else than to show our totally sober guy here in the corner. That gives you a hint of our target demographic at the wonderful Elysian. But let's, a little bit about me. I grew up in God's country in Eugene, Oregon, the beloved Eugene, Oregon. That's directly to the south of where we were. I went to the Harvard of the West Coast, the University of Oregon.
I saw the ducks on the back of the
Yeah,
shoes.
ducks on the back of the shoes. Nike, I'm contractually obligated to wear Nike. Phil will come take away my diploma if I don't. It's a hell of a thing being a duck in Seattle, I'll tell you what. So I got a degree in finance from Oregon, or depending upon where you're from in the country, finance. My dad was from Indiana, so it was a degree in finance. After graduating from college, I moved down to Scottsdale, Arizona. How do you get a kid from Oregon to move to Scottsdale, Arizona? You have him come visit in February. So I visited in February, and I'm like, oh my God, why doesn't everybody live here? I moved down there at the end of April. And then by the time July hit, I was like, I live in hell. I'm in hell. It's 102,000 degrees outside. So Arizona was great. I actually got into the lending business down there. I was in the mortgage business. This is 2004, 2005. Scottsdale and Las Vegas are fighting for the hottest real estate market in the country. It was a hell of a time to be in that business. My then wife, now ex-wife, this will be another presentation I'll hold at the local bar after this. Whole different topic. But my then wife and I decided that we wanted to have kids. So that meant a move back to Portland, kind of close to home. In reality, close to parents, kind of that instant daycare sort of thing. Still in the lending industry, I went to work for a bank in Portland. For those of you that are aware of the financial history of this country, this is in late 2007, early 2008. Time to be in the lending industry. It was wonderful. So anyways, the bank I worked at got sold, and then I got a job at another bank, and then that bank got sold, and I found myself working at this company called Northwest Mortgage Advisors. And it's here where my life like really changed. And the reason it really changed is because I realized one really big thing. I was terrible at being a mortgage broker. But I loved marketing. Again, I was sort of, bathed in the blood of our Lord and Savior Nike in Eugene, where I grew up. And so I'd always had a huge affinity for marketing. I absolutely adored it. And I started thinking to myself, how do I pivot my career to get into marketing? I had a client at the time who was a vice president of a local company. They needed a marketing person. I took that job, and I was kind of off and running. From there, I got hired on at Rogue Ales. If you guys know Dead Guy Ale, really popular brewery in Oregon. I got hired on there by some miracle. I was at Rogue for about 5 years, and then I went to work for Widmer Brothers, then Kona Brewing Company, probably the most fun job you can have because you have to go to Hawaii for work all the time, which is super tough. And then finally landed here at Elysian about 5 years ago. So I've been with a bunch of different brands in the beer biz, kind of doing the beer thing. But it's really Rogue that I'll probably refer to the most today. It was a transformational experience for me to work there, mostly because the guys that started Rogue were some of the first guys at Nike. The guy who designed the first Air Jordan was on the board of directors. Employee number 2 at Nike was on the board of directors. Jack Joyce, the founder of Nike, helped bring Michael Jordan to market. And the way that they thought about marketing was just next level. I mean, working here for 5 years was like getting 3 MBAs, unless one of those MBAs came from the University of Oregon, and that'll totally work. But it was an incredible place to work, and all of the lessons I'm going to talk to you about today that I've learned in marketing and geared towards how do we stand out in a hyper-competitive market, I really learned here, and I talk to my team about them on almost a weekly basis. But before we get started, let's kind of do a little definition of terms. What is marketing? I get asked this question more than any question I ever get asked about any beer thing in the history of anything, mostly from family members who don't understand that, what do you work in the toy department of some alcohol, some Sodom and Gomorrah world that you live in? And I'm like, well, kind of, yeah, I mean, mostly. But what is marketing? People will always say, well, marketing's a Super Bowl commercial. Oh, no, that's advertising. Marketing is your logo. Nah, it's graphic design. Marketing is my face on a coffee mug. That's merchandising. Coffee's a YouTube video. That's content. What is marketing? And to effectively tell this story, I'm going to introduce you to a neighbor and a really good buddy of mine, Steve. This is Steve and his son, Caden. Steve lives in Bothell. We used to live in the same neighborhood together. I've since moved 4 minutes away in Kirkland. But Steve and I were hanging out this weekend. Steve's an awesome guy. And every time that I'm over at Steve's house, he's also a Husky, like every other third person in this stinking city. I'm watching the Oregon Husky football game. I'm not a good, my recollection is soft. I think Oregon was ahead 400 to like -20. and something like that. I can't remember. Close to that. And whenever that happens, which is every time, Steve starts teasing me about my job, because I do kind of have this like ridiculous job, right? And he's drinking a beer and he's like, what is it that you do? Is this you? Is this what you do? What do you guys do over there? And his son, who is inquisitive, is like, yeah, Nick, what is it that you do? What is marketing? And I go, okay, Caden, let me tell you a story about your dad. You know that Jeep that your dad has outside that your mom calls the Blueberry Miracle? This is a Jeep that Steve bought brand new. He spent like $1 billion on it. Not only did Steve spend $1 billion on it, but like every other God-fearing Jeep owner, he's added everything under the sun to it. It's now got like 38-inch tires and these custom bumpers. He even has a locking gas cap on it. It's not 1974. People don't siphon gas anymore, but he's got a locking gas cap on it. This thing even has a winch. Steve lives in Bothell, Washington, where the streets are paved and the electricity flows. Like he doesn't live in, Jackson Hole. He lives in Bothell. Also, you've never seen a more excited guy in the world than when it snows in Seattle. Steve is like on call. He's driving around. One year, he towed a BMW out of a ditch with his winch, and it was like he won an Oscar and the lottery and the Super Bowl like on the same day. So anyways, I'm like, okay, Caden, your dad has this crazy Jeep with this winch and all this crap on it, and this is what your dad thinks he's doing. This is your dad's fantasy. He thinks that he's driving down the side of a mountain in like 6-foot deep mud, and the doors are off of it, and his hair is blowing in the wind, and Slow Ride by Foghat is playing on the radio, and it's so the world is his oyster. But the reality is this is what your dad's doing. Like the most hardcore off-roading that your dad does is like the double speed bumps in the Hagen parking lot, right? But that's marketing. The Jeep corollary is exactly what marketing is for your dad. Your dad associates, maybe directly, maybe aspirationally, a part of his personality with what Jeep is saying. He believes in what Jeep is saying, and he thinks that that Jeep is a reflection of his personality. And at the end of the day, that's what marketing is. Marketing is trying to get our customers, our clients, our friends, our Match.com dates, our husbands, our wives, our partners, whomever it is, to fall in love with our brand, whatever our brand is. And that right there is essentially your first 2 years of your marketing education. The next 2 years of your marketing education is that. And that's the $1 million question. Okay, all of that is nice, but how in the holy hell do you get people to fall in love with your brand? That's the hard part. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. So, everybody in this room, and I've given this presentation to a bunch of different real estate offices and a bunch of different realtors, they're all kind of thinking the same question. Why am I sitting here listening to a beer guy? And the reality is that we have a whole heck of a lot more in common than you think, besides the fact that we probably both love happy hours and all of that kind of good stuff. And the common thread is the fact that our businesses are massively competitive. At any given point in time across this country, there are roughly about 175,000 IPAs on the market. Seattle, of course, being one of the #1 IPA sort of regions in the entire country. It is, to call it a saturated market is like a gross understatement. Go to the grocery store. The next time you go, you know what, forget the grocery store. Go get gas and walk into the convenience store. And they probably have a gigantic craft beer section. And that gigantic craft beer section is probably overly populated with IPAs.
It's making space for cider.
It's making space for cider, and it's making space for seltzers, and it's making space for canned cocktails. And all this, I mean, beer itself is competitive. And then you throw in all of these other, my favorite term, by the way, inside term, share of throat. We talk about this in the beer business, share of throat. Use that next time you're trying to, sell a condo in downtown Lava. Share of throat. We want a large share of throat. No joke. There are decks out there with share of throat all over the place. And share of throat for beer has gotten smaller in the intervening years because of seltzers and ciders and all that other stuff. But there's a massive amount of these things on the market. Okay, so my goal here today is to make everybody in this room a beer marketer. How long do you think a customer takes at the cold case at a Safeway to make a decision to buy a beer? Give me a time.
8 seconds.
8 seconds, super close. You read ahead. 20 seconds?
20 if they're searching for
20,
alcohol.
it's forever. That's like 2 months in our time.
Say 6.
So
At least 30 seconds.
So 6 and 8, right in the middle, 7 seconds. So the data says 7 seconds, and here's how people make decisions in the beer aisle. Everybody in this room, whether you think you do or not, you do. Everybody in this room, you have a list of brands in your head when you walk into a store, right? And that list of brands is between 3 and maybe 9 different brands. I'm looking for Fremont, I'm looking for Rubens, I'm looking for Georgetown, I'm looking for Elysian, I'm looking for Sierra Nevada. And you're scanning the cold case, and you're like, Fremont, Georgetown, Rubens. Okay, I'm looking for an IPA, there's an IPA, I take it, I'm gone. Our goal is to get on that list and then to get higher up on that list. That's the game, right? And you're trying to do this in this crazy competitive market. Sound familiar? I mean, I think you were saying, what, 37 bajillion realtors in Washington, right? We're probably close. Like, massively oversaturated market. And that's what we deal with every single day in the beer business. The truth is that we're all selling a product. And I'm not talking about houses. I'm not talking about, I know that there are differences, and a beer is not a house and a service is not a CPG product, and we can get into all the nuances of that. But the reality is that we're all selling something, whether we're selling the company that we work for, whether we're selling ourselves, whether we're selling a delicious Northwest IPA, whatever it is. But if you take one big giant step back from that, what we're really selling is an experience. I remember when I was in lending, and I'm going to totally screw this up, but it's like, it's the experience of someone buying. You're not selling a house. You're selling like the experience of buying a house. As weird as that sounds, right? Like you're selling someone's future. You're selling someone's home that they're going to raise their kids in. It's not, 4 walls and a roof, right? And it's the same thing that we do at Elysian. The shot behind here is a shot of the Great Pumpkin Beer Fest, which we hold every single year down at the Seattle Center. I expect to see everyone there later on this fall. It's a massive celebration of the brand. Elysian is well known for IPAs, but one of the things that we're super well known for across the country is what we do with pumpkin beers every year. There's a long, convoluted story of how this came to be. About 20 years ago, the brewers screwed up and accidentally brewed too much pumpkin beer. They didn't know how to get rid of it, so they started holding the Great Pumpkin Beer Festival in Capitol Hill, and it took off. And now it's a 2-day extravaganza with about 7,500 people that are there. We have a costume contest every day. She didn't win. It's just a great picture. We also have a pumpkin pie eating contest. Yes, this is real pumpkin pie, and yes, that's our creative director, David Lohman. And no, he didn't win. The guy who won, it was phenomenally, it was like watching a python eat a rabbit. Like how he ate this pumpkin pie. We also fill an 1,800-pound pumpkin full of beer and then tap it and then take that beer and serve it to everybody that's there at Pumpkin Fest. Before you ask, 9 kegs of beer is how much fits inside of an 1,800-pound pumpkin. And evidently the pumpkin farmers are so concerned about these massive pumpkins that they grow that we have to give back them the seeds. We have to we sign a contract that we can't keep the seeds and sell them on the secondary market, because evidently there's a secondary market for pumpkin seeds, which a bunch of beer marketers could never figure out if you gave us all this, But anyways, it's a massively fun event, but what this event is it's so much more than the beers being sold. It's like you're walking into the Elysian brand. All of the weirdness that we're known for, we were born in 1996, grunge Seattle, that comes through. We've got tattoo stations, and we've got pumpkin gut fights, and we've got beer through the wazoo, and we've got food trucks, and it's everything that you've ever wanted to sort of live, love, and learn from Elysian. And it's that experience, it's that sense of brand that I want to talk to everybody about how we get to when we're working in a crowded market, and kind of the lessons that I've learned in the beer industry for sort of developing that unique brand proposition that helps us stand out in a big way. And the blueprint for that is 4 big lessons. The promise, something I call triple USIM, listening, and then a fun one called olfactory fatigue. And I'll even throw in a bonus one at the end. So let's go through these lessons. These are things that I learned in the beer business that really help us stand out in the sea of sameness. The first one is the promise. This is one of my favorites to talk to brewers about. Jack, the founder of Rogue, would always say, I don't care what a beer tastes like, I care if it lives up to its promise. You can get so lost in the weeds with how beer tastes. I love the nose of this beer and the mouthfeel, and I can tell that the brewer brewed with flaked oats and it's got a cloud, and you just go on and on and on and on and on. Jack would say, if you're drinking a chocolate stout, does it feel like a chocolate stout? Does it live up to the promise of being a chocolate stout, right? Like if you're driving a Porsche, does that live up to the promise of being a Porsche? And that's different for everybody in this room, but that Porsche should live up to that promise. What promises are we making in our transactions that we're not living up to? What promises does Elysian make in new beers that we launch that they don't live up to? If we take a step back and look, are we promising a hassle-free transaction? Well, that's almost impossible. Are we promising that, we guarantee you're going to get the house of your dreams? That's almost impossible. But are we guaranteeing that, hey, you know what? The real estate market is full of landmines right now, but I'm going to be right there next to you the whole step of the way. And I end up being right next to you the whole step of the way. That's a promise that we can keep. And this one is so great for brewers because brewers are so concerned with how beer, the beer tastes. We're launching a new beer in 2024, and we just had this meeting where they're talking about hop profiles and alpha acids and all this stuff that nobody cares about. And I'm like, look, guys, does it live up to the promise? This is what we say the beer is. Is the beer that? If it is, great. Let's move on. The second one is the biggest marketing lesson I've ever learned in my career, and the most important marketing lesson that I've ever learned in my career. And it's one that I talk to my team about all the time. And if there was ever one to listen to, this is the one. I call it kind of colloquially triple USIM because it helps me remember it. I learned this when I was at Rogue. I was sitting down with the president of Rogue, and he was saying, Rob Strasser used to teach us these 6 things that every marketing activation should have at its core. Rob Strasser is this gentleman right here. He's the first marketing director at Nike. If you guys watch the Air movie that just came out with Ben Affleck in it, he's played by Jason Bateman. He's a brilliant, brilliant guy. And he came up with these 6 things that every marketing activation should have at its core. Everything that you do from a marketing perspective should be simple, interesting, meaningful, unique, understandable, and unexpected. And if you throw some of the landmark kind of marketing activations through this prism, you'll see that it hits every single one of these in spades. I'll give you a couple examples. My favorite one is the iPod. Now, I know I'm a marketing guy that's up here talking about Steve Jobs, right? That's about as cliche as it possibly gets. But if you look at the iPod, it's simple. Steve Jobs launched it, and the line that he said to people is 10,000 songs in your pocket. Simple does not mean easy. The iPod's incredibly difficult, super technical to make. But this idea of 10,000 songs in your pocket, super simple. Is it interesting? The idea of taking all of your music with you at the time was a massively interesting proposition. Is it meaningful? You know, music is the soundtrack to people's lives. You can hear a song and it can transport you to a place. Is the iPod unique? Well, at the time, no. MP3 players were out, and they were out in full force. But an MP3 player from Apple with Apple's sense of design was massively unique. Is it understandable? Your entire music library goes everywhere you go. Super understandable. And is it unexpected? You know, people were waiting for something to come from Apple, but they didn't know what it was. And so when they showed it, it really took people by surprise. A couple of different examples of kind of this at play. So everybody in here, how many people have kids? Okay, so most everybody. I have 3 kids. And, you know, it's so funny. I don't know. I would assume that even kids in the Middle Ages hated eating vegetables. Even when that was probably all there was to eat or else starve. They probably hated it, right? My kids hated it. Every kid I've ever met hated it. And also, for some weird reason, kids love noodles. I don't know why. My kids loved macaroni and cheese, and then their whole world was spaghetti. And now they're starting to become teenagers, and like ramen is the big thing. Like, who knew ramen? I mean, I didn't really have ramen when I was a kid, but it's massively popular. So my wife and I, current wife, not ex-wife, awesome wife, good wife, wonderful wife. We have a friend, her name's Linda, and Linda has a son named Bentley, and Bentley hated vegetables. I mean, with like a fervent fire of 1,000 suns in his belly. And Linda kept trying to get him to eat vegetables, but he would never do it. And then finally she had an idea. And the thing that you don't know about Linda is that Linda is a world-renowned pasta chef. She goes by Salty Seattle on Instagram. She's written a book called Pasta Pretty Please, which is an awesome title. And she makes handmade custom pasta. She learned how to do it in Italy by some 95-year-old grandmother that taught her like all of the secrets to making wonderful pasta. And what she does is she colors this pasta with vegetables. So all of the color that you see here, even pasta Betty White, is colored by vegetables. So she started making this pasta with vegetables, and Bentley was eating it like crazy. And she started posting it on her social media accounts, and it got this huge giant following until finally one day, Oprah Winfrey called and said, hey, I noticed your pasta. This is really great stuff. I want to put it on my list of Oprah's favorite things. Do you sell it? And like any good marketer or any good actor, what did Linda say? Yeah. Of course I do. And so there was this mad dash to try to create a product to sell to Oprah. And after some finagling and figuring out, she came up with this product that's called Croquis. And Croquis stands for croissant-shaped gnocchi. So it's croissant-shaped gnocchi where all the colors are derived from vegetables. She even put an icon on there, the crow and the key for how you spell it. Simple, interesting, meaningful, colors by vegetables, right? Unique. There's not really anything like this on the market. Understandable. It's croissant-shaped gnocchi. That red is from beets. Super easy. And it's unexpected. This stuff sells for $29 a box, and they cannot keep it in stock. So when you're sitting there, you know, and you're trying to like justify, you know, the 3% commission or whatever it is, or whatever, you know, the premium pricing of your offerings, Space Dust is an expensive product. This is a great way to kind of put that through that rubric. If you can hit all 6 of these things, magic can really happen. And this product is absolutely flying. So I'm sitting up here as a representative of our beloved Elysian, and I'm trying to convince you that I know what I'm doing 100% of the time, which is absolutely, unequivocally not the case. We screw this up constantly. So you're watching the Super Bowl, and you see a commercial come up that is terrible. And everybody does it. You're like, that is the worst commercial I've ever seen in my life. How did they ever get this approved? They spent $30 million on a 30-second commercial that's terrible. Well, I'm here to tell you as a representative of a marketing team, I'll tell you exactly how it gets approved.
You're talking about it, ain't you?
You're sitting in a room with a bunch of people, and there's a decision maker in the room, and they're like, well, I like this direction. And you kind of go along with the flow, and you're like, well, I can't really fight this, and I don't really love it, but I can't really say anything, so I guess now we're doing this thing, and it's out there in the world, right? That happened to Elysian with this brand called Skull Rock. We developed this beer for Crystal Mountain that was incredible. We called it Chair 6, and it flew off the tap. Super drinkable, people loved it, and we started getting down to launching it as an actual product. And we were sitting in a room with a bunch of people, And folks came in that had decision-making powers, and they started pushing this thing in one direction, and they wanted it to be really edgy. They wanted it to be like, it's like a heavy metal band has a poster stuck on a flagpole in downtown Capitol Hill, and it's got to have this edgy name to it because the beer is made with this thing called Kveik yeast, which is like a German yeast, and it's got to have this crazy sounding name to it. And we're like, okay, I guess we'll kind of go with it. Well, what ended up happening is that the beer absolutely tanked. It didn't do anything. We launched it in the winter. It's kind of a light, summery kind of beer. It's in this dark packaging, so you sort of think that you're going to get a dark beer or dysentery by that label. It's kind of terrifying, right? It has a name that you can't pronounce, like Skull Rock. That doesn't really mean anything to me. I don't even know what this weird, I mean, I know that's not an umlaut, but it's something above the A, right? It was kind of this case of sort of being too creative, which is also sort of the problem. And this thing died. And unfortunately, it died. It was an awesome beer. So is it simple? No, it's super complicated. Nobody even knows how to say Skull Rock. I do, and I work for the company. And people were completely confused. Is it interesting? I mean, I guess in like a way that a car crash is interesting. Like it was, kind of. Was it meaningful? Well, nobody knew how to say the name, so it didn't really mean anything. Is it unique? Like kind of in a terrible way. Is it understandable? Certainly not. And is it unexpected? Like as a gaffe, right? And so the way that this kind of all happens in a good way is last Halloween, we launched a beer with the television show Chucky. Now, everybody loves Chucky, the terrifying doll. They sent us a doll, by the way, which was 3 feet tall and the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life. Oh, my God, it was so terrifying. We had to give it back, thank God. But yeah, go ahead.
Did those pumpkin seeds go back to the...
You bet your butt they went back. We'd get sued. Those weren't the fancy pumpkin seeds. Those were normal, regular old pumpkin seeds. Trash pumpkin seeds. They really do. I'm not kidding. They really do. We like have to sign a contract and the whole thing. But this beer, we developed this beer with the folks at NBC and Chucky. We actually developed it also with the creator of Chucky. The label is really simple. It's super unique. Nobody expected it. Nobody saw it coming. Even the name, A Killer Wit Beer. Our head of PR is sitting at her breakfast table one morning, and she shows her husband this, and he goes, in like perfect dad joke fashion, he's like, oh, killer beer, waka, waka, waka. And she kind of drops her spoon and goes, that's it. That's the name of it. We need that name. And this thing went stratospheric, simple, interesting, meaningful, unique. Nobody saw it coming, understandable, unexpected. Impressions off the charts. We got tons of press coverage. We couldn't keep it in stock. And the holy grail happened. This beer, which ran out, caused people to go, I can't get the Chucky beer, so I'm going to buy Space Dust. And sales across the board went up. Next lesson, probably one of the hardest ones, is to listen. The overwhelming question that we get from people every single time we post a picture of a beer on social media is, where can I get it? I can't find this anywhere here in Kent, Washington, which is kind of absurd. Like, go to a Safeway. How can I score 6 of these? I'm in El Paso, Texas. Anybody out there? Will this be available in other states like Nebraska, for instance? Our beers are sold nationwide. It's the number one question that we get asked. It's also the number one reason why a beer customer goes to our website, is to get information about the beer and where can we buy it. So what do? Oh, and by the way, when they ask these questions, we don't have an answer for them. So we don't engage. We don't answer. Because legally, I can't tell you to go to Safeway on 6th Street. It's illegal. It's called retailer assistance. I can't tell you to go to Jackson's in Bothell. I have to be like, well, it's out there. You're on your own. So we couldn't answer. So what did we do, this brilliant marketing team? We made the website really pretty. We redesigned our website and we put these cool graphics on it. We tried to be funny. This is called an age gate. You have to prove you're 21. And people are like, where can I get your beer? And we're like, no, but our website's really pretty. Yeah, I know, but I'm in Texas. Where can I find it? Well, look at how this opens when you click the button. And we kept not answering the question until finally, I'd like to say it was me, but it probably wasn't. But for the sake of this, I will say I was like, well, wait a minute, everybody. We should create a tool that helps people find our beer. And we should make it to where you could like plug in your zip code and like all the beers will pop up. This is something that was out there. We just hadn't really built it yet. So we got with a company and they built us this tool that we call a beer finder. You put in your zip code and all of our beers show up around you, everywhere, on tap, in stores. So we've done 2 things. Number 1, we've created a way for people to engage with our website and we've increased sales. But probably the most important thing that we did is we now have an answer that we can give to those people. So instead of just leaving them hanging, the guy that wants to know where in Texas he can find the beer, we go to our beer finder. Here's the link. Go with God. Good luck. Let us know if you have any questions. How many times do we not listen to our clients or our customers? We do it all the time at Elysian, all the time. I want this, or I'm looking for this, or what about this? And because we don't have an immediate answer, we kind of shuffle off onto something else. We're famous for it in the beer industry. I want to know what the answer is to this. Oh, well, here's this. Well, no, I want to know what the answer is to this. How many times are we not listening to our clients? That's something that is so important in beer, and we are constantly trying to find ways to engage with those consumers and listen to the questions that we're asking. Is there a part of the transaction that people don't like? Is there a part of the search that people don't like? What are people scared of? Making sure that we're answering those questions. Kind of the final lesson in this group is what I love to call olfactory fatigue. I like to say it because it makes me feel like I'm smart. But really what olfactory fatigue is, when I was in high school, I went to this leadership conference, and the woman, this wonderful woman that was kind of the counselor for our leadership team, she drove us out to the coast in Oregon, which is like an hour and 15-minute drive. Well, unbeknownst to us, this woman had 2 standard poodles. Now, if you're not familiar with the canine world, a standard poodle is not the cute little puffy, that's evidently called a toy poodle. A standard poodle is like a big giant wet mop on 4 legs, right? And she had 2 of them. And they were constantly wet, and they were constantly in her Aerostar minivan, because this was back in the 90s. And her minivan, I can still smell it, right? It was beyond overwhelming. So we get in this minivan, and we're kids, and we're, oh my God, we're driving it. An hour and 15 minutes later, we get to the coast. We pile out of the car. We go into the house, and I'm like, oh, I forgot something in the van. I walk back out to the van, and I open the door, and it hits me in the face. I was a victim of olfactory fatigue. Olfactory fatigue is the neurological adaptation when you can smell something and then you can't smell it anymore. As humans, it's built into us so we can recognize when a tiger in the jungle is around the corner, something new in our environment. But if it lasts there for a long time, it kind of goes away. Just like right now, if I say you can't feel your butt in your seat until I say butt in your seat, and now all of a sudden you can feel your butt in your seat, right? Well, this idea of olfactory fatigue happens to our brands all the time. We're around our brands so much that we kind of lose their smell. You guys are so involved in the real estate business. You know the ins and outs of every single transaction. You're used to what inventory looks like in the market. You're used to where stuff is going well and where stuff isn't going well, that it becomes second nature. And you forget that customers are seeing this maybe just for the first time. And you might be used to the ups and downs and the swings and how stressful and how terrifying this can be, but customers are just realizing this for the first time. This is a brand called Odd Water. It's a sparkling, it's like a hoppy LaCroix that we just came out with. It's non-alcoholic, right? We've been working on this thing for 3 years. And we were constantly working with our teams internally to keep this fresh. How can we get people not to have this brand olfactory fatigue? This is a new product. It's new for Elysian. Constantly trying to keep it fresh, keeping people internally tasting it and excited about it. We worked on it for 3 years. A normal beer takes about 4 months to do. And because we kept people kind of excited about it, now we had our sales team going out and selling it, and this thing is out there growing like a weed. So olfactory fatigue, remember, losing that smell of our brands, big, big lesson. This is the final one, and this is kind of the bonus lesson. This one is so powerful, and it is so hard. Where the promise is really easy, the Makita is really hard. So what is the Makita? Well, Jack at Rogue said that the Makita is an Inuit word that means the truth that isn't spoken, or the unspeakable truth. The reality is I've spent hours Googling the Makita, and I can't find this anywhere. So this is probably one of Jack's other awesome maxims. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. He probably made this up. But the point behind it is really great. This is all about the unspeakable truth. Like the thing that you know is kind of true, but you don't want to talk about it because it's sort of terrifying. But it's an awesome place to start your marketing. It's an awesome place to start looking at your brand because it really helps snap things into clarity. I'll give you a real estate example. The Makita for the real estate industry is you don't need a realtor to buy a house. If you start with that Makita, maybe you get to, you don't need a realtor to buy a house, but you sure as hell need one to buy the house. So if you start at this place, it helps clarify which direction you're going to go. And it's a hard look in the mirror. And I'll give you the example in the beer industry. The world doesn't need another IPA. There's 175,000 of them on the market. And you know what? They're all good. Well, like most of them are good. They're all good. Georgetown, awesome IPAs. Reuben's, awesome IPAs. Fremont, awesome IPAs. They are all good. Good beer is the price of entry. Just like good service, it's the price of entry. The world doesn't need another IPA. Well, what's the problem with that? Elysian's an IPA brewery. That's what we do best. So we have to look at our IPAs from a completely different lens if we start here. We can't market that IPA as an IPA. You got to go a different route. So we're talking with our brewers, and they brew this fantastic hazy IPA. And hazy IPAs are massively ubiquitous on the market right now. They're everywhere. And he brews this thing, and we start asking him, how'd you brew it? What'd you come up with? And you got to love brewers. They always name the beers whenever they come up with them. And they always name it some trademarked name that we can't use and will immediately get sued. He named it Cheeto Fingers. And we're like, great name. Frito-Lay is going to sue us in a second. But we were like, why'd you name it that? He goes, well, the color kind of reminded me of that orange stuff that you get on your fingers. And it reminded me of being a kid. And I always pissed my mom off when I would get that orange stuff everywhere. And we were like, nostalgia. That's it. And we marketed Hazy 96 towards nostalgia. We put a VHS tape on the cover so any 21-year-old kid will have no idea what we're talking about. If you want to feel old, oh my God. I'm in a meeting and I'm pitching this beer for the first time to this sea of Anheuser-Busch executives. I'm like, 1996, that was the year I graduated high school. And this girl pipes up in the back and goes, that was the year I was born. Thank you. Thank you. Good night. But we really leaned into this nostalgia sense with it. The VHS tape, 96 is when Elysian was founded, and people fell in love with this package. It says, be kind, unwind on it. We have some in the back. So grab one, try it, and then go buy 90 cases of it out of the market. There's no chance. But all of this comes from starting with the world doesn't need another IPA, which is a super tough look in the mirror. So I'm going to give you an example of how this all comes together, and then I'm going to get out of here because I'm taking some time. This is how it all comes together. And this is how it all comes together in the context of the number one beer that Elysian has, Space Dust. Space Dust was brewed back in 2012, and it was brewed as part of what was called the Manic series, just kind of some one-off series that we did at Elysian. And these brewers had imported hops from Australia, and those hops were called Galaxy hops. And when the hops came here all the way from Australia, they got crushed in the bags that they were in. In the bottom of the bags was Galaxy Dust, and they brewed with this Galaxy Dust, and because brewers are geniuses, Galaxy Dust became Space Dust. And that's how the beer got its name. In the beginning, the beer looked like this. I don't know if you can see it in the back, but it had kind of this 50s sci-fi movie look and feel to it. This, by the way, is the Makita. The world doesn't need another IPA, right? So Space Dust has to be something different. It's a West Coast IPA. We got to build it into something different. In the beginning, it had this 50s sci-fi look to it, like When Hops Attack and the Blob and the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. And one day, one of our founders Googled the name Space Dust, which is always a terrifying thing to do because you're like, Google's going to own it and they're going to sue us immediately. So he Googles Space Dust. And if you get out your phones and Google Space Dust candy, you will see this pop up. And what this was a candy that was developed by none other than General Foods. General Foods has more attorneys than we have employees. And Joe, our founder, immediately his heart drops out of his stomach. And he's like, oh shit, that is the perfect name. We're totally screwed. So Joe starts making phone calls. And by some miracle, he gets a hold of the legal department at General Foods. And he says, hey, stupid brewer in Seattle, we got this beer, we named it Space Dust. Can we license this from you in any way? And General Foods goes, oh, we developed that in the 70s. We rebranded it. It's called Pop Rocks now. You guys can have it. We'll sign it over to you. We don't even use this IP anymore. And they signed over this to us for free. And this, we're like, well, okay, now you take the orange. What if the orange is a hop? That turns into this. And now all of a sudden we have a beer that's living up to its promise. We have an IPA with an awesome name, clean, crisp, West Coast. What you see is what you get, right? Super cute. The thing about Space Dust is it's really balanced, but it's really strong, right? So be careful with space dust. I mean, go buy 50 cases of it today, but be careful. So we got to this, the beer that lives up to its promise. And then we started developing campaigns behind it. Our most recent campaign is, it's just a great IPA. The idea being that if you walk into a dive bar and you ask the bartender, what are the hops like? What's the barley like? What's the ABV like? They're probably going to say, it's just a great IPA. Trust it. You can trust Elysian. You can trust this beer. It's just a great IPA. Simple, interesting, meaningful, unique, understandable, unexpected. We filmed commercials with this. It's going like crazy. The next thing was we started asking our customers, what do you like about space dust? And what they really liked about it was the humor. It's so funny that you guys have this cartoon character on this beer that's 8.2%. It's kind of cute. It's kind of subversive. It's like you guys were doing acid for 10 years. And you kind of came up with this illustration. So we leaned into the humor, and we started doing ads that said, it's a hop, not an artichoke. We had a lot of customers that said, I love the artichoke on your label, or the green pine cone in some ways. It's like, it's a hop, not an artichoke. And these went like crazy. People loved these campaigns. We made T-shirts of it and posters, and people started buying them. So we listened. We listened to what people said about the brand. And then finally, new news. We started coming out with new variants of space dust. A couple of years ago, we came up with Dank Dust, which is a hyper-dosed version of space dust that I am only legally allowed to tell you has a botanical smell to it when you open it. We launched it. I'm also not legally allowed to say this. So we launched it on a specific date in April, between April 19th and April 21st. This also represents my favorite conversation I've ever had with the legal department. When we designed Dusty's eyes, his eyes could not be so low to where he was stoned, but they could be high enough to where he was tired. So I literally, and I am not making this up, I literally sat on the phone with my designer. And I'm like, with lawyers, I'm like, how about here? And they go, no. And I'm like, David, click, 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 click. Eyes go, whoop. And I'm like, how about here? No. Click, click, click. How about here? That's good. He looks tired. I'm like, okay, whatever. You went to law school for that, right? Like, but this new news is how we kept that olfactory fatigue at bay. And we're launching more dust variants. Keep your eyes out for juice dust coming out in 2024. This is the way that we keep this now 12-year-old product new and relevant and exciting. We keep olfactory fatigue at bay, not only at Elysian, but in the broader company itself. And this is what's happened to space dust over the last 11 years. In 2012, it was first brewed. 2 years, it was barely launched outside of Washington. And then it started taking off like a weed. Now, right here in 2014, 2015, Elysian, of course, was acquired by Anheuser-Busch. So it opened up the nation to us. But we had the right product with the right name, with the right package, in the right style. And now, last year in 2022, it was just under 3 million cases. And out of those 175,000 IPAs that are on the market, Space Dust is number 4, which is a massive achievement for a little tiny brewery out of Seattle. So wrapping up, kind of bringing all this home, and I really appreciate the attention from everybody. The whole point is that these lessons help us stand out in that sea of sameness, that overwhelming competition that we're constantly fighting every day, whether it's in the real estate business, the shoe business, the beer business, the wine business, whatever it is, we're all facing increasing competition. So by making sure that we're living up to our promises, the promises that we're making to our clients, the promises that we're making to future clients, what are we promising? It's not complicated. Are we living up to it? The idea of triple USIM, and the one for me to really take home: simple, interesting, meaningful, unique, understandable, and unexpected. Look at a product that's doing really well. It will have those 6 things to it. Nike Air is that. The iPhone is that. Everything out there that's hitting a home run, it's probably hitting those 6. Listening. What are your clients saying? What keeps them up at night? What are the complaints that they have? What are the questions that we have? Making sure that we're answering those. Keeping away from olfactory fatigue, remembering that for those folks that we're working with, this is brand new for them. And even if they're repeat buyers, even if they've done this a bunch of times, it's still a new process. We're in this all the time. Remember, feel your butt in your seat. And then finally, the Makita, that hard look in the mirror, right? Starting your marketing from a place of what's the unspeakable truth? The world doesn't need another IPA. So where do we go from there? That's not a stop sign. It's just to help you find the clarity that helps build that brand moving forward. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Jack. I love this quote so much. He would say, marketing is just a sense of humor, a good gut, and a way to look at the world. He would look at us all the time at Rogue, and he was this old guy, and he was super gruff, and he'd sit down at the end of a long table like this, and he'd rub his temples, and he'd just go, it's about the thinking. It's about the thinking. You can have all the money in the world and do a bunch of advertising. That's easy. But what's the thinking behind it? It's about having a sense of humor, a good gut, and a way to look at the world. Thanks.